Hello and welcome to another video on the best games of a letter, Arcade Edition. And this is for the letter K. Yes, in this video series I imagine, what if I could only choose 5 games per letter per system and have to discard all others? What would I choose? So this means I'm not coming from the point of view of which games are most important to gaming history or even which are most beloved. But instead, for me, what games do I personally enjoy to play above all else? Now my choices here may surprise you, but this video series it's just a bit of fun really to rekindle some old memories and help give some people some suggestions on what games to try next. So the next time they're looking through their fully laden retro gaming lists, they can decide what to perhaps play. Now this letter was a really interesting letter to get my teeth into and choose for, but in the end I'm really happy with my choices and I fondly hope you will give all of these arcade games a try. For my 5th choice I've gone for this little forgotten title called Kangaroo, released in 1982 by Sun Electronics, who are of course better known today as Sunsoft, and it was licensed to Atari. Now actually on its release it had some short-lived popularity, with this game even featuring in its own Saturday morning cartoon on the CBS show in the US called Saturday Supercade. In the game you play Mama Roo, whose baby's been kidnapped by a bunch of naughty marauding monkeys. Therefore, donning her boxing gloves and with a determined bounce, she sets off to take on all the monkeys and get her baby Roo back. Now the rules are simple here: bounce or walk, dodging the monkeys, punching the hurled fruit to make it finally to your blindfolded baby and rescue them. Now on the way you can collect the fruits for points or even ring a bell to reveal more fruits to help with those high scores. You rescue the baby and then go on to another screen, of which there's 4 distinct layouts. After this the game loops but with increased difficulty. Now for me, I think this game's a lot of fun, with your kangaroo hero animating brilliantly with so much humour and personality bursting from every pore. But it is a good job that it has such great animation and charm to the game, because this game is mega tough, and if it wasn't for its inherent cuteness I think I would really be screaming for the hills with this. Instead, as I play, I just have a determined grin and I go for just one more try, because let's be honest here, there's a lot to frustrate here. The collision detection is really bad, resulting in many a death. Just a slight triggering of the edge of a platform cause you to fall to your death. But despite all of that, there's so much cool stuff here as well. The monkeys that throw apples which you can dodge or jump or duck. The apple cores that you can actually punch back for extra points, gaining even more if you actually hit one of the monkeys in return. There's weird pink giant apes who temporarily steal your boxing gloves, meaning that you have to wave a white flag of surrender, meaning you can't attack anyone for a short amount of time. Okay, I suppose I better be subjective here. This is a personal choice, because I realise there's a lot here that stops this being a classic. But I really enjoy this title, and I think it's one that I think everybody should try. Besides, who wants perfection? Jankiness is charmful, and I like my choice. Oh, by the way, another useful tip, because I know the music can grate. There is on the dip switch, you can actually switch the music from the music to just sound effects, which I think plays a lot better. Now, I know the 10 Pence Arcade podcast boys tried this and they all hated it, especially Sean. But whilst I get their criticisms, I still think there's enough to enjoy here. The game also saw some great ports on the Atari 5200 and Atari 800 and also the Atari VCS as well. And they're all great versions, and I think in some ways actually improve on the arcade parent, if I'm being completely honest. But anyway, give this game a go and see what you think. Okay, that brings me on to my 4th choice, and I've gone for King of Fighters 99 Millennium Battle. Now, to be honest, I could have chosen any in this long-running fighting series, but the one I've chosen is simply because I played it the most, with this being released in Japan on the Dreamcast and also on the PS1. And I think it builds up the best of SNK with a generous 30-person roster and great gameplay and luscious hand-drawn animation for each each character that you fight with. Now, you probably can glean from my series of videos, fighter genre isn't perhaps my favourite. I mean, I do enjoy them, but I am, let's be honest, part of the bash the buttons brigade. Still, of all the 2D fighters series, this is, I think, actually my favourite, often actually even preferring it to the Street Fighter 2 series. For me, the reason I like the game so much is the choosing of the 4 fighters. There's cool, more thoughtful moves and a nice varying roster of great players to choose from. Now, famously, this series was the brainchild of Takashi Nishiyama, who of course had revolutionised the fighter genre with the first Street Fighter game, and he left Capcom to go to SNK when he was refused to do a sequel to his own game, with Capcom passing the reins to another developer. For SNK, he would do the Art of Fighting games and Real Bout, creating iconic characters for each and interesting ideas to the fighting genre, becoming a real rival. But I think in 1994 he really hit his stride because he mixed in the characters from all the SNK games like Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and some of the SNK's back catalogue, all placed in one fighting game. And on its release, this quickly shot to popularity in the arcades and became a yearly franchise where they tweaked it each time and honed the game even more, extending the player roster as well. Across this period, fighter lovers fell into two camps, with you either being an SNK boy or the Capcom lover, each regaling the virtues of each. Now, as I mentioned, I think both are great, really. I enjoy both companies' outputs, but overall I think this game is pretty. It's amazing characters, and I definitely urge you to give this game a go. Right, okay, let's go on to my number 3 choice, and this is for the game Knights of the Round by Capcom, and released in 1991. Now, this game is really special to me, where I think it's a great scrolling beat 'em up, and it just really hit home on its release, where I couldn't stop playing it, giving it a go at every chance I could get. Here you play King Arthur, Lancelot or Percival as you smash and slice dice your way through several levels set in England to overthrow the evil King Garibaldi and reunite England once more. Now, as a big fan of Golden Axe on its release, this game in 1991 came at the right time for me because it offered me a much needed fix for a Golden Axe follow-up that I was craving. And the game's graphics are gorgeous here throughout, with the title also throwing nifty ideas as well, such as showing your experience progression with your armour improving. So eventually you will be in resplendent gold suit of armour by the end. Now, gameplay wise, the button layout was pretty standard really. The button 1 to attack and 1 to jump, and pressing both together would do a super move which would take out lots of enemies but deplete your energy. But despite it not doing anything particularly revolutionary, what it does here is really, really solid, and I think for me that makes it such a worthwhile game to play. Worthy of note as well as the music, because it's done by Isao Abe, who did some of the Street Fighter 2 songs, and I think he captures some great tunes here as well. And that's it really. I mean, the game doesn't do anything particularly revolutionary gameplay wise, but it's a lot of fun, and especially with a mate over, this is one well worth spending some time with. Now, back in the day, outside of the arcades, this game was released on a pretty solid SNES port, which I used to play around a friend's house. But then, of course, years later was the fantastic Capcom Classics Collection Volume 2 in the Xbox and PS2 era, where they finally gave you the arcade version of this game on home release. It was also in the PSP Capcom Classic Collection as well, allowing you to play this game on the move. More recently, this has appeared in the Capcom Beat 'em Up Collection. So alongside MAME, there's just countless ways to replay this classic game today. Okay, let's come on to my number 2 choice, and for this I've gone for the lesser known platformer hack and slash game called Kid Nicky Radical Ninja, released by Irem in 1986. In the game you must twirl your spinning sword to take out the enemy henchmen of the evil stone wizard who have kidnapped your beloved Margot. What we have here is so much fun, with fast, fluid gameplay and as addictive as hell playability, bursting with character as our spiky haired ninja takes takes on the world. Overall, this game is just so much fun with great bosses, varied levels, and solid gameplay throughout. I just can't recommend this game enough, with me addictively putting hours into this again for this video. I just can't put it down. Now, originally it was called Ketsu Yanchamaru, which translates to the Wonder Boy Chamaru, and he has gone through a bit of a haircut on his Western release, with him originally having a rat tail ponytails kind of haircut, more in keeping with a traditional Japanese hairstyle, although I personally find him rather more fun and engaging on his Western outing when he's got the cooler, spikier hair. Now, back in the day, in either localized release, the game had reasonable ports on the Apple II, the Commodore 64 and the Super Famicom. More recently though, the game has been re-released on the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4 eShop, so there's no excuse not to play this amazingly addictive game once more. Okay, so that brings me on to my number one choice for the letter K in the arcades, and I've chosen, yes, it's another bullet hell, the brilliant 2003 shooter by Cave called Ketsu, Kizuna Jigoku Tachi, which roughly means apparently cutting the bonds of hell. And this is actually my favourite shooter of all time at the moment. I just love this game. Now, story-wise, there's something here about being set in the year 2054 in a global warming, rising sea levels and warring factions. And then you're tasked by the UN to take out this particular faction because they're refusing to give up their weapons and sue for peace. And nothing says suing for peace like destroying a whole continent and killing thousands to tell them that they're being warmongering. So, silly story-wise aside, this is, I guess, just another Cave shooter, but I think it does more than that, because although the gameplay is incredibly solid, it's the scoring here that Ketsu does a wonderful job of. You see, firepower-wise, your craft can either do standard fire by pressing button 1, or pressing down button 1 for a quickly more focused continued fire, and fire button 2 drops a big bomb. Okay, so far so Cave standard, but what's great and elevates Ketsu to perfection for me is the score system. You see, each ship will drop a 1 to 5 multiplier depending on how close you are to the enemy craft when you destroy them. It then gives you 1 second to destroy the craft for the same score multiplier, regardless where they are on the screen. So this means that you build up great multiplier chains, really adding a whole new dimension to the game if you're playing it for score. And this therefore really cements this game as my absolute favourite, and it certainly shows the genius of the team that, you know, have done many of my favourite bullet hell shooters such as Dudonpachi, ESP Galuda 2 and Mishiyama Sama, with the team Kenichi Takano and Tsuneki Ikeda and Akira Wakabayashi, again showing why they are simply the bullet hell masters. And if you've not got into some of these Cave shooters, you know, give this a go, you won't regret it. Okay, so they were my top 5 games to the letter K. Of course, there's always some big hitters and a few honourable mentions that fail to make my personal list, so I am going to briefly mention them here. Okay, the first up, of course, is Kung Fu Master, released in 1984 by IREM and originally called Spartan X in Japan. Now, this is undeniably a really important game in video game history, being the world's first beat 'em up, and it's a huge amount of fun as well, but if I'm honest, it's one that I find I'm not very good at, and I just don't spend that long on it personally today. Now, another big release and another first goes to Karate Champ, also released in 1984, this time by Data East. Now, this was the first ever one-on-one beat 'em up, and you know, if it wasn't for this game, games like Street Fighter and Street Fighter 2 just would never have been. So undeniably, this is a vitally important game in video game history, but again, it's just not one that I actually enjoy to play, so hence why it didn't make my list. So another big hitter would be the puzzler Clax. This Atari 1990 game had loads of home ports, and I know it's fondly loved by many. It's kind of like mixing in shape matching, like with Puyo Puyo, with Connect 4. It's a puzzle game, although I've never really gelled with the title, if I'm completely honest. Talking of never gelling with the title, we also have Karnov. This was, for many, a fondly loved platform game released in 1987 by Data East. But for me, apart from him being a fat man, which is nice to see in a video game who can breathe fire, I've just found this game incredibly clunky, incredibly tough to play, and if I'm honest, I've never understood the love for this game, if I'm being perfectly honest. Talking of games I don't like, but are definitely well loved by many, another one to mention is the 3D fighter Killer Instinct made by Rare, which was done by Midway under the license of Nintendo in 1994. Now, of course, I love Rare, I love many of their titles, but I've never really got on with this game, finding it as a 3D fighter, it's incredibly clunky, and I think there's so many other better 3D alternatives. But I will concede, I am, as I mentioned, a fighter button masher, and so perhaps I'm not getting the nuance of this game that others do that are far more skilled than me. Now, another fighter I actually enjoy, even though I do concede it's not particularly great in the gameplay department, is King of the Monsters, released in 1991 by SNK. Now, I love the concept of this, essentially taking the game Rampage and turning it into a beat-em-up fighter. So you're smashing the city as you fight each other and using buildings as weapons is a lot of fun. But it does have a limited move fighting sets, and the slowness of the monsters does make this feel more of a missed opportunity, with it not being as fun as it should be. Now, they did do a sequel called King of the Monsters 2, The Next Thing, the following year in 1992. They've tried to add a bit of variety here, adding a small scrolling beat-em-up section before you take on the monster itself in Player 1 mode, and there's definitely more going on here, but I think it even loses more of the charm of that original game for some reason. Okay, so they're the big hitters, but there's some real hidden, lesser-known gems I think worthy of your time, and I want to mention them here. Now, first, we have a motorbike game where you kick other riders off their bike and try to finish the race first. Sound familiar? Well, this is called Kick Rider, and it was released way back in 1984 by company Universal. Now, I'm going to concede it's not the greatest game out there, being a kind of like bump and jump knockoff, but undeniably this has got to be the granddaddy to Road Rash, of course, that was so famously released all those years later, and for that I think it's worthy of a try. Now, this is an interesting overhead shooter called Kiki Kaikai, and it's released by Taito in 1986. Here you play Priestess Sayo-chan, who must go to Ghost Town to take on all the ghosts and ghoulies in the temple to rescue the 7 lucky gods. What you have here is a fun overhead run and gun shooter steeped in Japanese myth and legend and lots of nice ideas, making this a unique and fun and worthwhile title to give a go to. Now, talking of fun games, Toplin's 1993 oddity called Knuckle Bash is definitely worth your time as well. This is just so delightfully madcap with just such weird sort of off-kilter graphics, featuring 3 ex-wrestlers, including a guy dressed like Elvis. There's just so much delightful weirdness and campness to everything here, and it's just worth a fun playthrough. Also worthy of note, it's actually designed by Junya Inoue, who would go on to Cave and work on many of the famous games there, such as Dodonpachi and all those main titles. So it's really interesting to see somebody who's now so synonymous with shoot 'em ups tackling another genre such as a scrolling beat 'em up. Now, actually, the letter K has a really good number of scrolling beat 'em ups, and particularly those looking to recreate Sega's classic Golden Axe. And King of Dragons, released by Capcom in 1991, is one example of this. This actually feels like a first attempt of what eventually became to be known as Dungeons and Dragons Capcom games that they released all those years later. And that's not surprising, because actually it's many of the same team that went on to do those games. But what we have here is a fun title definitely worth your time, but was overshadowed by Capcom's own Knights of the Round game, and that's probably why it's lesser known today. Much better though, if you love your Golden Axe style knockoffs, is this Chinese title called Knights of Valor, released by PGS in 1999. This has gorgeous artwork and is a really good fun Golden Axe style game, and definitely one well worthy of giving your time and giving it a go. And whilst you're at it, check out their sequel as well, Knights of Valor 2, released the following year in 2000. This is another solid entry to the series and carries on with different adventures and different things you can do. Right, okay, there you go. That was my top 5 for the letter K, and it was certainly a tough letter to choose from, but ultimately I'm really happy with the choices that I finally made. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to hear your own suggestions and thoughts on what games you would choose for this letter. So look out for my next video covering the letter L, and this is going to be another surprisingly tough one to decide against. So until next time, keep it retro.